We've done today glades, barrens, cliffs. We're going to do one more grassland habitat called riverscour. It's a really cool, super cool ecosystem. Specifically, it goes by the name Cumberland riverscour in the Nature Reserve ecological system, in reference to the fact that most occurrences in this region occur within the Cumberland River watershed. River scours are kind of hard to map on any one map, and I didn't do a good job of updating this, but they're especially found over here where rivers drop off the Cumberland Plateau here, or where they drop off of the Highland Rim, like here, onto the National Basin. The key, though, is where rivers drop in elevation from a high plateau to a lower plateau. They pick up speed as they're going down those escarpments. And as they go down, the flood, the scouring effect of their floods intensifies and gets greater. So they take with them boulders and rocks and sand and debris, and you get these flash flood episodes. So it's in these areas, you don't need fire, you don't need buffalo, you actually have water maintaining really thin, cool, riparian grasslands. So here's where one creek called Spring Creek, if ever you've been to Cummins Falls State Park, which is a fairly new Tennessee state park, the waterfall drops off up here, and then the river goes through this narrow gorge, and you can just see the effects of floods as they scour down this gorge, laying down tree trunks down in here, scouring the banks so that there's exposed rocks and boulders. And it looks kind of barren, right? And in fact, in many areas it is. It can be totally devoid of any real plant growth in many cases. But there are going to be areas, though, where the flood effects scour just right. And there's a zone where, trees can't grow too close to the edge. So what is best adapted are grasses, perennial grasses, that can put down root systems within those jumbled masses of rocks, kind of like out in a glade. So really, these riverscour ecosystems are very much akin to glades and barrens. Here's one of the largest ones, and this is one that actually is developed primarily on flat exposures of cherty limestone. This is a very globally rare ecosystem called a Eastern Highland Rim riverscour glade. It doesn't look like much, doesn't look like a grassland, does it? But notice that wherever you have the seams in the bedrock is full of this native grass, which is a big bluestem. We've been looking at that grass, though, carefully for the last decade. Turns out it's not typical big bluestem that you would find up on the tops of the hills and the prairies. It's a completely unique big bluestem that's flood adapted, likely is a completely new species to science. I spent one day here as an early professor, probably in 2009. I just got out of campus one day to go mess around at Rock Isle. I really wanted to go swimming. Right. So I did that, and I photographed some of those seeping cliff faces, which are like right here. And I walked over and just explored this whole scene in the day. I went up on top of this cliff, crossed the river down there, went on this glade, and that glade, hopped the boulder, hopped through here. And there's a high island right here that you can't see it from this image, just back of these trees. And that high island is so high, it very rarely floods. Like it's above the flood. And boy, you should see photographs of at high flood stage when it's 100,000 cubic feet per second of raging whitewater. It looks like the area right below Niagara Falls. I mean, water that's up here, just raging across these surfaces, stranding big logs 2 and 3 feet in diameter, carried by the flood waters. It just feels wild. And then you get around this bend down here. And of course, you got, an artificial bridge Tennessee Valley Authority built. And then you got this waterfall, which looks incredible, although it's a little artificial. And then you get around that and you get this gorgeous forested ravine or gorge, beautiful deep river pools. And you make one last bend and it all changes. So in one day, I found 7 or 8 rare species here, including one rare shrub new to Tennessee, only occurs in 3 places east of the Mississippi River, and found some other cool stuff. All right. We eventually ended up just last year publishing an overview paper of the riverscour ecosystems of eastern unglaciated North America, a review paper. So if you want to read about these cool ecosystems, and we offer a definition of riverscour. These are open, riparian habitats of rocky, stable substrate zones, meaning bedrock, boulder, and cobble. These rocks are just not moving very much in floods. They're often along high gradient streams where the streams are dropping in elevation, like over waterfalls or rapids. There's periodic high energy flows. Here in the south, we don't have ice, but up in the north, you have ice flows that keep these open. Debris and high water. Then there are edaphic factors like the glades themselves, which inhibit woody vegetation and promote persistent grassland, shrubland, open woodland, and outcrop communities. And this is the clincher, rich in conservative heliophyte species. Species that are very conservative and need high sunlight are really rich here. That's what differentiates these ecosystems from your run-of-the-mill gravel bar or sandbar on a river. These are very different. And I won't get to that until next class, next Tuesday. We'll talk about how sandbars and gravel bars are different. Here's the distribution of riverscours throughout the eastern part of unglaciated North America. The Great Falls of the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. is one of the best sites, right at our nation's capital. But why was it so sad to go down around that bend and see what happens on the other end? Well, because if you turned around and looked back upriver, there's a dam right there called the Great Falls Dam. That dam backs up the Caney Fork and the Collins Fork River, unnaturally impounding its waters. So we have a lake. And then when you get down below this, what beautiful natural free-flowing river, except it's really not because you have a dam here and they release water occasionally. So it's not free-flowing anymore. But when you get around this, you realize you hit another lake. Why? Because 40 miles downriver is Center Hill Dam. So the river is dammed at multiple points. And that's the only stretch, a little over a mile, of seemingly natural free-flowing river with riverscour left on the entire eastern Highland Rim. Now, that's that same segment. Here's the Caney Fork River, all the way to Center Hill Dam. And so how much riverscour ecosystems did we lose along the way? We will never know. This is what we have left today, full of rare species, some of which inhabit prairie species. There's even pools of water in the last 5 minutes that I've got here, making good time. There's pools of water on these limestone rocks. About that same big eventful day when I found all those rare species, I collected a bunch of stuff. You know, I made specimens. They came back to the museum, took pictures. And you see all these little plants growing out here that look like grasses in those tussocks. Well, I pulled it back and I tried to identify it. And I said, well, I'm just not happy with this. I can't really put a name on it. Sent it to a friend of mine who was one of the world experts on that group. He put a name on it that was different than what I called it. But I wasn't satisfied with his name either. So I just put the specimen away and just forgot about it. Then I had one of the sharpest students I've ever had. Her name was Claire Chaffray. She came in as a grad student working with me. And I didn't influence her in any way. She just was so good. She came in, saw that specimen one day while working in the herbarium, realized that something was different. I was so gone building SGI, I was just non-existent, not around. She took it, realized that it was a completely new species of science. And Claire then ultimately went on to find more locations for it around the southeast, named it as a completely new species about 2 years ago, differentiating it from its relatives. And that's its entire worldwide distribution right there. This northern county is the place that I'm talking about, Rock Island State Park. So highly rare species, a G1 to G2, in terms of total numbers of populations, extremely rare and imperiled. Down below the waterfall, there's big accumulations of limestone boulders, which are a different ecosystem, rich in shrubs, including the endangered rock grape. But I want to come back to these waterfalls because the waterfalls have always been there in some amount. But now the volume of water coming through those falls is greatly artificial. All right. How do we know that? Well, if you go back and look at this map here, it all goes back to the impoundment of that dam, which was constructed, I think, in the 20s. That's an old dam. That thing might not have long left to live, right? But when they impounded that water behind the dam, it raised the lake behind the dam, 75 feet, 100 feet, which means that it backed up the waters all the way around the backside. And now those waters are eroding through the mountainside and basically just flooding through. So that water that you're seeing is the flood waters from the raised lake on the backside of the ridge coming through. And they're basically coming through cave systems, emerging all down through here. Now, some of that was always there, we can tell from the plants, but a lot of that has been greatly exacerbated. Much more water is flowing through than probably was natural. All right, and then just to cap it off, in my last couple minutes here, I'm gonna make you guys sit through it all. I want to end with two slides, and these are some beautiful unexplored, or until recently they were unexplored, riparian limestone scour grasslands down in these deep canyons, little South Fork of the Cumberland River up in McCreary County. Pretty shallow river, rich in mussels and all kinds of aquatic species. These bedrock shells are basically in a box canyon. Every time the waters get up, this whole canyon fills from cliff to cliff. You wouldn't want to be in here. You drown. And what that does then is maintains this flood scoured, beautiful grassland with a half a dozen rare species in here. And that's a great scene up right